because that's when you before then you don't have light bulbs, you don't have serious telegraphs, you don't have serious telephones, and it was that line that it was like I got shivers when I heard that. That's when the modern world starts, the 1880s. So that's why I put that date on it, because many of the things in it looked that way.
Yeah, sounds very synchronistic.
Yeah, and I really felt like sometimes I think that the universe does that. It gives you hear something very strongly because it fits. And it stays with you. So, but so anyway, that's the basic dream. And my personal interpretation of it is that, again, whatever it is that we are facing, or that the world is facing, that creates the wall that many, not necessarily all, but many psychics and remote viewers turn into. It has to be either so different from anything we can comprehend, possibly so terrible, or possibly something that hasn't been decided. It's got to be one of those three, but my suggestion is probably the first two, that we just can't get our minds around it. We can't see it. Except that there's snow and there's ash.
Yeah.
Those are clues. Yeah. They're not clues I really am comfortable looking very closely at. But it's kind of disturbing. But in the long run, we're okay, and actually that fits with, I know a number of psychics that I've read there that are more futurists than I am, and they often, if they can't see immediately in the 21st century, but they see further out, like 2050, 2060, and what they tend to see is people living in small rural communities, or under glass domes or something, which there was no glass dome in my dream, but there was, again, this sense of rural community and a return to largely to farming life. Family life.
Yeah. Has any of this changed your understanding of it over time, especially working with your husband's runes?
Well, I'd say the major things that I think now, from when it was in the 1980s, when I first started having premonitions of something, I used to put it in the context of the time, like wonder, was this going to be like a big nuclear war or something? And I even had a few dreams about that sort of thing, so that may happen as well. But I think it's probably, whatever the wall is probably a worldwide rather than a US-based event. It's not an extinction level event, because I think that's the message of almost every dream I've had. There is life afterwards. It's just different.
Right.
I had one in the 1980s where, we were living in a community, and someone came riding into town wanting taxes on horseback. And they said, the president of the United States declares that we're here to collect his taxes. And someone yells from the back, who is it this week?
Okay.
And then grabs them and pulls them down because we don't want anybody shot,
Yeah.
I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, so that may be where that came from. But it's that kind of thing that there's always, particularly the very strong, what I call the wall dream. There is life afterwards, but it's rather harsh for a long time. But there may be and I also think that it may or may not be one great event. It may be, from what my husband has come up with the runes, it may be a series of events rather than one giant event, or perhaps a series of events that lead up to larger one that kind of kicks things over. But again, end of the world, I don't think so. But end of life as we know it right now, very possibly.
Yeah, that sounds like it fits. Are there any psychics that you know of that can see anything beyond this wall?
Oh, I think lots of people see beyond the wall, but they just see much further. Now, to my knowledge, and John Hogue I've suggested you might want to have him on this program sometime. He's a self-taught Nostradamus scholar and personal psychic as well that I respect a great deal. And he's another very level-headed person and probably been a really big influence on me. Nostradamus doesn't talk about a wall. What he does, from what John can see, and John reads the medieval French and the Latin and all of the languages you need to know to be able to try to figure Nostradamus out. But he does talk about some really horrific wars and famines and just really awful stuff that sound like they come around anywhere from from this period to the 2020s.
Yeah.
And astrologically, that's when they would date using his astrological system. So, again, along with the snow and the ash, that I kind of wondered if that was like a symbol for climate problems and war. which would
Yeah.
fit with what Nostradamus has. He has great famines and great dryness in some places, and great other great amounts of water in others. And but his website, I think, is johnhugprophecy.org or something. But you can find him by looking him up on the internet. He's really brilliant, and he will answer his email.
Wow. Great. That's good information. Thank you, Melody.
Sure.
But this begins to make a bit of sense that this wall, this period, we don't know what it is, but it's something big, and it's obscured. So that's quite interesting. Well, thank you for that. I'll pass it over to Plain now.
Yeah, I've got a question from forum member Green Meadow. You've talked about the possibility of another great war. So could you tell us what you see, how this is being revealed to you, and perhaps what input the runes had on this impression?
Okay, this has come in two ways. One, like John Hogue, I previously mentioned, I pay a great deal of attention to current events, and I'm very interested in, I'm basically a news hound from way back, addicted to news channels and that sort of thing. So there is the mundane level on which I can see the puzzle pieces, as someone with a degree in history, the puzzle pieces coming together. Now, that's not psychic, that's just putting things together in a way that makes sense. On the other hand, my husband was actually, we were doing the rune reading for what do we expect this year, and we were just actually doing this on October 31st, which is the Celtic New Year, since we live in Ireland. And interestingly enough, in the previous years, we've seen economic possibilities or problems not affecting us as badly, but affecting the world, which has happened. He's seen, possible solar stuff when the sun got really active. But this time, he saw the runes, and he unfortunately, he's been suffering from a bad toothache, so I just have not been able to, he hasn't been able to do a follow-up reading for the show. But basically, just trust me, the runes were like everything you would expect to see if the great puzzle pieces were coming together for a great war, and that's what he called it. He said, it looks to me like it's built, he said, it feels like, the energy around, like when you read about before World War I, really World War I more than World War II, where the nations of the world are just kind of putting their pieces together. And it was really a surprise because we weren't really expecting to see it in the exact runes. I think I may have mentioned them on the day afterwards in the WebBot forum, and I may be able to put that up on the website. I'm really apologize that that's the one thing I did not get back to look up before the interview, so it's not in my notes. I actually have here, go look it up, and I didn't. But basically, that's where that came from. And since then, since he did that rune reading, we've been also noticing on the cards of the day that there seems to be, along with the economic stuff, that there was a great decision, a puzzle that came up several times when I first started reading the cards in August that we didn't know what it was. And then suddenly it appeared that puzzle had been decided, the puzzle being a decision and being made behind the scenes and was being lied about. And my serious gut feeling now is that decision was that decision on the part of whoever ultimately thinks they control these things, that they wanted to try to have, that somehow their great problems would be solved. Probably the economic problems would be solved by having some sort of great war. Now, the feeling I'm also getting from the cards is that, it's like beware of unintended consequences, because the cards seem to be suggesting that they think they're in control, that they may or may not get their war, but if they do get their war, it's going to get way out of control and probably will contribute to the wall. I mean, that's a guess of mine from what I'm sensing. And again, they may not get their great war this year, and that's actually was reflected in the 2012 reading, but you've got this buildup with a lot of things happening that are people oriented, and that it looks like in 2013, if those energy cards are correct, that probably if it happens, that's when they get their great war. But I think it really gets out of hand. I think and that would again sort of fit with some of the Nostradamus stuff, although the timing may be a little bit different.
Okay. Well, here's another question from forum member Green Meadow. Cliff has said that some of the beginnings of the global revolution will come out of Ireland. So given that you live in Ireland, what do you think of this? How do you think the Irish might contribute to the global revolution, and what might trigger them into action?
Well, there's two possibilities. There's the simple one that I'm not sure would lead to global revolution that could certainly have problems for the European Union, which is that in Ireland has an unusual situation in that in all the other countries of the European Union, their parliaments or their legislatures can vote to change their treaties. But in Ireland, if any EU treaty changes the Irish constitution, which 99% of the changes do, the Irish by law have to vote on them at the public. And the only way to avoid that would be to essentially declare martial law, for lack of a better term, or just to try to ignore it, in which case people would in fact riot. However, the things Cliff seems to be suggesting are so strong that I don't really know, and I could, as I said, I've been trying to get Cliff to talk about this himself for almost a year now. I've even stayed up to listen to Scottish Sovereign's interviews with him and asked him, and all we kept getting was that he didn't want to answer it because he was afraid of affecting the outcome. Now, since nothing that I obviously know of happened in September, I have put forth a question in the interview with him, and I don't know if it will be asked or not, but I hope it will be. If he could explain further now on that, since we're past September of 2011, because I myself would like to know, because I live here, is there any more information on what the webbots have? Because I can think of lots of things, but it's really just me speculating. And other than the EU thing, I don't know what makes Ireland specifically more ripe for revolution than anywhere else.
Well, maybe history. Small size.
But, okay, the Irish, though, the Irish have actually a history of taking and taking and taking and taking until they just explode. So that is possible. But I mean, for example, the Irish Revolution of 1916 was probably indirectly a reaction to the potato famine of the 1840s, but it took nearly 80 years to take place. And it didn't, because the Irish seem to be really good at hunkering down and having what I would think of as basically rebelling, but without doing it obviously. I mean, for example, they will put their, like right now, moonshining is becoming very popular again. Tax avoidance is becoming an art form again. When we first moved here, if you had work done for you, workmen asked for their checks to be made out to cash. That's happening again. In fact, the government has looked into trying to eliminate checks. And make checks. They haven't done it, but they've talked about it, because so much of the economy is the black economy. That is typical of the Irish way of rebelling. People think of the Irish are very, they like to get in fistfights and things, but when it actually comes to actually picking something on and doing something, yes, you have the situation in Northern Ireland, but that's a very different issue, although that could play into what Cliff is talking about. I mean, he doesn't make a distinction that I know of between the Republic and Northern Ireland, so perhaps things start to blow up there. I don't know. They've been relatively calm for years, but in general, except for that kind of political situation of trying to get rid of England and trying to be independent, again, largely because people were starving. My husband's business partner has told me that in 1916, basically what happened was people were working 40-hour, 50-hour, 60-hour weeks and still not making enough money, and their children were starving to death. And finally, people just snapped. And they felt they didn't have anything left to lose, so they started shooting people. And that could be what happens again. I mean, if things got that dire, the Irish probably would, but I think it would take. That's why I want to know what Cliff has to say, because I don't know if that's what he's alluding to, or if it's something else.
Well, there's another angle I think that might be part of this, and that is the importance of the British aristocracy centered in the city of London, and just the historical relationship with Ireland. So, I mean, I think there's probably some visceral genetic history in the Irish about how they don't care for those people in the city of London. And that could be a symbol.